You need to have a problem that's painful enough so that someone is willing to pay in time or money to solve it.
Our featured speaker today is the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at ThriveDX, Head Coach at MIT Bootcamps, and was a founding partner of Kanda Growth Consulting. Passionate about upskilling workforces across the globe, Ingrid brings her product development and coaching experience to empower and train cybersecurity teams of all sizes. Ingrid, thanks so much for making time. It's a great pleasure to have you as our featured guest today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So, if you want to start us off telling us about what you've currently been up to, we can kind of go from there. That sounds great.
Good. So let me just step a little back. So I'm originally from Argentina. I studied economics. Then I specialized in finance and I started working in a private equity and venture capital fund. Afterwards, that was like during one of the biggest economic crises in Argentina in 2001, 2. And then I moved to McKinsey. Like I always wanted to do consulting. So I left the fund and I started working at McKinsey, where I worked for 5 years. In the middle, I did my MBA at MIT. I took a year off where I danced tango 8 hours per day, 6 days a week, took it very seriously. Then I went to MIT. I came back and I went to MIT because I was very interested in focusing on leadership development. At MIT, there were like the most innovative leadership teachers like Peter Senge or Otto Schammer. So I also kind of specialized in that at MIT, but also at McKinsey. I was in the organization practices, everything related to change management and to mindsets change and to people. So I came back to McKinsey, came back to Argentina for a few years, and then I left. I was just very surprised that in the same time that Argentina went from top 10 country to where we are today, Singapore went from nothing to biggest GDP per capita. I had an offer to teach leadership at the National University of Singapore that kind of opened the possibility to go. And then that didn't happen, but I was like, I'm going. Anyway, I'll go and explore. And then life, like I started talking to a guy that did entrepreneurship, had a startup there, and he was in San Francisco, so wanted to meet him before, like to see if I actually wanted to work with him or not. So I went to San Francisco. He didn't turn out to be very real. And so I stayed in San Francisco working with a fellow Sloaney from MIT who was building a very cool alumni community. And actually right now, that's still alive. Like it started in Facebook and then we were trying to take it off Facebook. So I stayed in Facebook, but today is the biggest alumni community at MIT. We have like 6,000 users that's still working after like more than 10 years. So I was there for a while. I was like interviewing for Chile, Boston, Singapore. Because it was like very random. And so I decided to face my biggest fear. And I was like, if I face my biggest fear, afterwards, maybe, I can make bigger decisions. My biggest fear are frogs. I know, sounds weird. It's a phobia. What can I do? It is what it is. So I went to Brazil to do a retreat in nature where I was by myself in nature for a week. And I was like, I'll just look at the freaking frog, have whatever needs to happen in my body happen. And then, I'll move on. There's no option. So I did this experience. There were no frogs, but it was still very revealing. And eventually I came back to Argentina and decided to move back to the US and start my own consulting practice. So I did. This time I went to Boston instead of San Francisco. I started my consulting practice and ended up specializing in two totally different parallel paths. On the one hand, on digital transformation in pharma, doing a lot of work in New Jersey and in Switzerland. And on the other hand, in education and technology. Ended up doing a lot of work in Saudi Arabia, focusing on training women to get jobs and also helping upskill the whole Saudi workforce, which was a very, very inspiring work that I did for several years. And then eventually I decided to move to Israel. So I moved to Israel about 4.5 years ago. For the last 4 years, I've been working at ThriveDX, that was originally Cybin. And here we focus, you probably don't know, but in the world, there's 4 million open jobs in cybersecurity because there's not enough people that know cyber in the world, which leaves us vulnerable for crime, but also retraining people fast into cyber. It's not only a way to keep the world safe, but also a way to give like good jobs with a good future and good income to a lot of people. So we focus on reskilling people into cyber and also upskilling in organizations. Everybody needs to know something about cyber. So we do that training too for MIT all around the world. I've been in Brazil, in Australia, in Jordan, in Germany, in Boston, in Japan. So I've worked in like 20 different countries. I've lived in a lot of different countries. And so, yeah, here I am.
Thank you so much for giving us such an exciting introduction to who you are. I knew that you had lived in several different countries, but you really expanded my horizons about who you are. So, what made you choose Singapore as a destination and stay there beyond just, seeing the opposite had happened there that had happened in Argentina? What kept you there?
I didn't end up staying long because I was very attracted to Argentina. It's a place where there's a lot of chaos. And back then, for example, I remember the vice president had stolen the company that printed money, and he was still the vice president. Found guilty of that, and he was still the vice president. So I can't be in a place where there's just no rules, right? Like, why would someone not steal my purse if this is what's happening? So it's a very chaotic place with no rules. So I was very attracted by a place with clear rules in Singapore. And some people say, oh my God, like they don't allow you to eat chewing gum. I don't eat chewing gum. I don't care. I would rather be in a place that's safe, that respects rules, where there's clear rules. One of them is not eating chewing gum, than a place that's so different in Argentina. So I was very curious to see how I was very attracted to that country. And if I look back now, I've been between extremes all my career. Between Saudi and Israel, Switzerland and Brazil. So I guess I'm resilient, I'm curious, and I like to explore different cultures.
That's so interesting. I think the range of different cultures you've been to is so broad, it's hard to really see any line connecting them, so to speak. Do you think to yourself when you've been in Singapore for a while or Boston for a while, I'm ready to move on to somewhere else? Or does something else call you at the next destination you end up going? Like, how do you feel that change happens?
It was never a decision. It was always like happened and I ended up in the other place. Like it was never like I was like, oh, I'm going to design my career and I'm going to go here. Like all my movements across my career has been looking for something else. Say it's not like, oh, this is the next step of my career. It was like, oh, I feel like living here or going somewhere else. So it has always been kind of very intuitive, following something.
And I think that's kind of an amazing ability, though, to be able to let yourself flex like that. I mean, it kind of makes sense to me how you wound up working in entrepreneurship. But taking us to the time that you worked at Candle, I know you said, I started a consulting company. I'm sure that there was a lot of, joy and pain in that growth experience. What lessons did you take away from that experience that now maybe help you guide others in your role as a coach?
That I didn't like it. I liked all the flexibility that it gave me, and I like that I was single and I was able to travel around the world. And I have, with the MIT community, we're friends with all the coaches, so it's a very international lifestyle that's very cool. So that was great. It was a phase in my life, but it's very lonely. One of the things I realized is that it's very hard to emigrate to a country and start your business or a consulting company. Both together, I don't recommend because it's too much, and you don't have network and you don't have a community you don't have someone that's waiting for you at work every morning. It was too much change and it was very stressful for me. So, for example, then when I moved to Israel, I looked for a job and I was like, okay, I want to go. And thanks God I did, because like a month after I started working, COVID kicked. So I was at home for a while. I found that those two things that maybe, I'm all for change. Who knows what the next step is?
Absolutely. I think that's quite interesting that you had all that flexibility and you found that actually it ended up being quite a isolating experience where you like weren't able to stay in one place for very long and get that sort of connection. I think that's interesting and that's something that I haven't thought about before.
I follow a spiritual teacher and he talks about the creative tension between belonging and becoming. Like belonging, like for example, when we are born, we belong to our families and we're there. And as we grow up and start becoming something else, we start kind of pulling away from our family. Teenagers, like they don't want to be part of their family, want to be part of their friends. And there's always this trade-off between growing and becoming something else and still feeling like you're part of something. I guess in my life, I always focused on becoming. I was always the youngest everywhere. I was like doing courses with adults while I was in high school. When I was 12, my dad took me to board meetings. Like, I was always doing like more, and I was always separated from people my age, say. I remember like when I was 15, I went to for a summer to study German in Switzerland, and I was with refugees, learning German with refugees. And then like my friends were like, having boyfriends at the beach. Like, and I was doing this, and it really separated me from my peers. So as I grow older, I start appreciating this belonging feeling a lot more. As I keep emigrating and traveling, it's harder, and this is part of why I eventually moved to Israel. And when I say I got a job, it sounds like I got a stable job. No, we were like, it was a startup that had just got it funding. We were 10. We didn't have a product. We didn't have a team in the middle of COVID. So there was a lot of change in it, but I had a team, I had my people, and it was for me, it was very comforting. And I feel even today, very connected with all of them.
That's excellent. I think that's interesting. It's something that people so desperately want to like feel connected and feel like you belong. But it's also requires someone who's had like you have to have that connection with them to some degree. And you've had such a, varied and interesting journey. I imagine there's not many people who are able to say they've had a similar journey.
Yeah, but you connecting, for example, I think this community is one of these amazing communities where, and this is also what we've been trying to do, where we want you to belong in the wanting to grow, and in the wanting to become. So, like the experience of having gone through a boot camp is a shared experience that hopefully makes a big difference in all your lives. And then, this brings you all together. And even in the being different and being international and having different backgrounds, you can belong to one community.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one thing I did want to dig in a little bit more to is I know you are passionate about helping others cultivate sort of an entrepreneurial mindset. After all the coaching you've done and are doing, in your view, what does that mean? And do you think there are like innate character traits that some people have that make them better suited for entrepreneurship? Do you think it's totally something you can learn? How do you think it comes about, if that makes sense?
No, I definitely think it's something you can learn if it's what you want. So, for example, I was talking to a friend and she was like, yeah, I mean, in my next job, I'm going to be CEO. And she was like, something like, of course, we all want to be CEOs. And I was like, not me. Like, I'm just not interested in that, right? Like, I'm a really good second. I'm not interested in having all that responsibility from the beginning. And so, I think that I like to be part of something new and create and everything, but it has to be something that matches you. And maybe what you need is to partner someone that has the complemented skills. Like, for example, when back to MIT, Erdine is an extrovert, right? And I'm an introvert. So it's great to be with him when he's running trainings because he's the one like moving people and I don't know, coordinating, something like that. Last year we did a training where Erdine was not there and the rest of the team, we were all introverts. So I found myself like suddenly being the MC and the energizer. And while I was like talking, I was like, who the hell are you? Like, what are you doing? And again, I can do it. Or I feel more comfortable. It exhausts me. So looking to work with someone that complements your skills and that you can have a common goal, but that you can, be working on different things. I think that's super, super important. And there's no, but you can still be a CEO as an introvert. That works. Just like you need to know what's harder for you and work on it. But I think it's definitely something that everybody can do. And you should yourself. I think what's a risk is to follow external mandates of like, oh, I need to be an entrepreneur, or I need to be a lawyer, or whatever. Like, just look at yourself and see what really works for you.
That's really greatly articulated too. And I think of it at this point because I know that most people will call me an extrovert, but I feel very introverted a lot of the time. And I think it's just finding out how to flex that part of you when you need it. As you said, like I can pull out my inner Erdine when I need it, but I prefer not to, you know? And that's so great too that you've found yourself in a team that you can kind of play off of that way. I wanted to actually go back to some of the other work that you had mentioned. So, the project that I read about that you did with Candle, where you developed and delivered the Train the Trainer programs to 120 female community college teachers in Saudi Arabia, to me sounded pretty transformative, like in the context. So, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about it and maybe explain like how you got involved in the government initiative to increase female participation in the workforce. Because I was surprised to read that there was such an initiative. I don't know if I should be, but I was.
Yeah, so I got involved through a company still exists called Fullbridge. They are an education and technology company, and they had contracts. Like I was working with them as a coach, and they had contracts in Saudi. Now, what was this initiative? Saudi had licensed the edX platform under its own name, and what Fullbridge was doing was blended learning, which is, well, now it's pretty common. Back then, it was more innovative. It's like, okay, you learn online, you can have the content download online, and then you have activities in person where you actually like put into practice what you're doing. They were launching edX in Saudi, which is a different name, which I will not remember. And they wanted to launch it with 3 blended courses in what was community colleges, in female community colleges, because there you have like all education is segregated. What we did, and it was a big, big challenge, was developed a training for trainers in English, and then they spoke English and Arabic, and then they needed to train trainers that were actually going to train students, right? It was like a 3-level training process. But when I was there and in the delivery was in Arabic, right? I don't speak Arabic or anything close to it. So it was a very interesting challenge to be there and see, for example, just to understand the level of ignorance. Now I'm a lot more conscious every time I need to translate anything. We were developing the slides in English, and then we were sending them to translate, and then they were coming back, right? And I showed it to a colleague of mine, and she was Lebanese or something. I was like, I don't know why I was showing them to her. And she was like, Ingrid, this is not Arabic. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, this is like windy jeans, like random characters. This is not Arabic. And I was like, okay. What was happening is that back then, Microsoft for Apple didn't support Arabic. So when I would open a file in Arabic in my Mac, it was not Arabic, it was random characters. When I was opening it in a PC, it would look properly. I didn't even realize that, like this was how far away we were. So I got a PC to work with Arabic. And then once we got there and that we started training the trainers, they were like, this translation makes no sense. So they retranslated everything. And then when we were in the live training with all these trainers, everything was different for us. Prayer times and having no men in the room, having all women with their faces covered, like everything was like radically different. We adapted and we learned. And yes, there was this initiative, and they increased a lot with the new king. This was the previous king, the new king and MBS. They've been pushing women a lot more. There's still a long way to go, but there's a lot of initiatives to support women.
That's excellent. I'm shocked by that fact about the Windows system or the Mac system didn't accept Arabic characters, and so you had wingdings. I think I know the text you mean.
Yeah, like random characters, it's like error.
Yeah. Oof, that's so strange. But well done on figuring it out.
Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show.
Do you think the teachings of that session obviously translated to other languages, but do you think it would translate to other cultures where maybe there should be more initiatives to help women in that regard in a work sense? Or do you think it was very targeted to the culture that you were particularly focused on?
So these courses were around teamwork, employability skills, looking for a job. So yes, definitely they applied to everyone. We had to be very culture sensitive. We had to be careful with pictures, like who are we showing in the pictures? Like we couldn't show women with hair or women with short sleeves. We had to be careful with how we position things. So like you need to meet people where they are. And back then, and maybe now it's different, but back then they didn't have a lot of experience with like the world. So for example, we need to look for a motivation framework. We went for a classic, well, maybe at MIT we would have looked for things with, I don't know, meditation, and then you know what, we went for Maslow's pyramid, and we did have, for example, we had a section that was feedback, giving and receiving feedback, and we were told that women don't give feedback. And I was like, "Ooh, we're appropriate for everything." For me, it was a super hard opening experience. This was the first one. Then I had several ones. I developed very strong friendships for that. And it was for me, at McKinsey, I had worked a lot in change management. And this is like the change management of a whole country that's changing. I don't know. I learned so much about just living your beliefs outside and meeting people where they are and working with them. And then you can pick them up on your way out. But it was such a different thing that you need to be very respectful of where they are and not come with your own thoughts of what it should be, because it's not. So you can support them where they are. And I think this applies everywhere, because everywhere we have our own beliefs and our own structures, and you just have to be very respectful of where people are and where they want to get, because if they don't want to go where you want to go, they shouldn't.
I think it's amazing, though. I mean, obviously, you're an empathetic person, so it seems to me that you're pretty well suited to work in a culturally sensitive job. You have kind of taken on so many different challenges in the different cultures that you've worked with. So I was kind of wondering, are there other unique challenges that you encountered in addition to that one? And did you find some of those experiences not to just, teach you things about how you wanted to work, but maybe also be like rewarding in ways that surprised you?
You mean Saudi?
Well, not just there, but I mean, in the other places that you've lived, even moving to the US. And like, I would say, as someone that's from the East Coast of the US, who now lives on the West Coast of the US, I know it's all American. But even that for me was kind of a little bit of a culture shift.
I mean, there are always culture shifts and they are always rewarding. Otherwise, I would not be doing it, right? I'm very curious and I'm very observant. I'm respectful also, like even in my lineage, like my dad is Jewish, my mom is not. So there was always like a mix of different things. Every culture has its pros and its cons. And by now I know that everybody thinks their own country is the worst country in the world. Like with the politics, it's like everybody thinks, no, my president is the worst president. And I went through, like, in Argentina with Kirchner, in the US with Trump, in Israel with Netanyahu. Like, I went through all of it, and at the end, nothing is as extreme and nothing is as bad. And we just take our politics like so. Even for me, I've left Argentina 10 years ago, and still what's happening there triggers me a lot more than what's happening wherever I am. All the changing cultures are different, but they all have its pros and cons, and there's no perfect place. You just take, what you like and what you don't like. You see if you can live with it or not. And if you can't, then go, because we're not going to change the whole country.
Absolutely. That's very true. We take our own politics and our own world so seriously, or we say, no, ours is the worst one. Ours is the most extreme one. I hadn't thought about that before, but I think that's a very good point you make about like everyone perceiving their own that way.
Yeah, for example, now, there's a lot of inflation in Argentina. I don't know who I was telling, like in Israel, like, yeah, there's a lot of inflation. They were like, yeah, like here. I was like, here, there's 6% inflation. In Israel, there's 100. In Argentina, there's 150. Well, 6% inflation. It's insane. For Israel, too. For us, it's nothing. We wish we had 6% inflation, right? So everything is relative. And we need to remember that there's always different realities.
Wow, that's such a pertinent example that I think so many people wouldn't think of, but it's so fair. Now, I know you're a head coach for the MIT Bootcamp program. What actually drew you to the program? Did it change the way you thought about entrepreneurship or mentoring? And were there any sort of particular tools from the program that you found very useful for you in your career or other areas of your life?
What drew me to the program? Bimala or Erdin. The first program is like, sure, you want me to go to Turkey and do a program? I'll do it. And then it was amazing and it was so inspiring. And I think that one of the things that I learned the most, and I keep repeating to everybody that comes across, is that you need to have a problem that's painful enough so that someone is willing to pay in time or money to solve it. It's amazing how difficult this concept is. Like, all throughout the bootcamp, we keep like, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. And outside also, like, I remember when I moved to San Francisco, and it felt to me that people, and no judgment of San Francisco, but this was my experience then, like, they were kind of trying to create needs instead of solving problems. Like most of the startups, and like this was during one of the bubbles. And I was like, let's just find a problem. It's an actual problem. And so I randomly ended up in this company solving this cybersecurity problem that I had no idea existed, right? But it exists, a very concrete problem. And I would like to always work places where there's a clear problem that we're addressing, because otherwise it gets very confusing. There's no guiding problem and that clarifies who your customer is. You get distracted along the way. So the problem. My key learning.
That makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate that answer, because I think a lot of us talk about the people we've gotten to know and the network as being like an amazing part of this. And that's what drew you to this team initially. But then you kind of found that secret sauce that made your journey sort of make sense. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, and it's still the people watching, like, the transformation that people go through in this program is it's really, really inspiring, and it's a way to make an impact across the world, and I love it.
Absolutely. I'm just going to fully say that if you would not like to answer this question at all, you don't have to. But one thing I've been curious about, as there have been so many changes in the bootcamp team and then in the structure, and then obviously the pandemic caused more changes in the structure and maybe more changes in the team. How do you feel that has impacted the program positively, negatively? Just like, what have you seen really change in your time there that you've observed that? And if you just want to say all positive things, that's okay too. But I can only imagine what it was like to put that program online. So I just want to hear from your perspective.
Every program is different. So every program has been different from the beginning. It's different because sometimes the topic is different, because the coaches are different, because the team is different, and it's normal that things evolve and change. Putting the program online, actually was relatively easy because we had been thinking about going online before. And so we already had a plan. And when it happened, we were ready. There was an online program before, and it was not blended. There was no team component. So we didn't like it. And we had decided to rebuild it. And we had already been thinking about it for a very long time. Then we knew what we needed to do. And the shift happened relatively easy. And the program is still a very transformational program, even online. It opens doors for a lot more people to participate, people that otherwise would not be able to fly to Boston or whatever. It opened a lot more doors to women that cannot just leave their kids and go. It opened a lot more doors in the Middle East also. So it evolves, it changes, yes, but I don't see a way that we can prevent that, given that in every program there's different people, there's different organizers, there's different objectives. It works like that.
That's interesting. I didn't realize it was already the plan, but I'm so glad to hear how it's opened up the floor to so many people who didn't have the opportunity to fly to the designated location and do the boot camp there. I think that's such an interesting point. I do think since you've worked on so many different things and in so many different areas, I'd love to hear how you define success for yourself. What's your personal yardstick, so to speak, about when you know you're succeeding and when you're happy with how you're doing it at your current goal?
Great question. I would say if I'm happy. I remember when I was at McKinsey, like working at McKinsey is hard and it has a high personal cost. And I remember saying, like, do I keep choosing it every day? Do I keep choosing it? Even, some days are harder, some days you don't want it, but in the long term, you keep choosing it. Then stay. And when that answer is no, you need to leave. The day that you don't choose it anymore, you need to leave, and you need to pay attention to when that moment comes, because otherwise you just stay through synergy. And again, I never had like this very clear staircase of success. Like my career was always more of a zigzag. I think that for me, success is it's really about happy where I am and doing what I'm doing. And it definitely needs to have an impact. Like it has to be, I'm not saying like just like changing the world, but it has to be something meaningful for me. Like something like, I don't know, like a gaming company or something like that doesn't work for me. Has to be meaningful, has to have impact in the world, and has to make me happy. And it usually coincides with the people I'm working with.
That's such a wonderful answer. When I'm happy is such a good way to, I think, kind of just take, not that we can be happy all the time, but just kind of take the temperature of what's happening. What is going to kind of lead to us feeling satisfied, even if we're not feeling that satisfaction in the moment. So making sure that we measure the happy times alongside the stressful times. I think that's really key.
And a good KPI could be happy to go to work every day. Again, there's always bad days. I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, building off of that a little bit, how do you find balance in your work, your family life, mentoring, and everything else that you're passionate about? I know that can be a really individual thing.
Nobody said I had found balance. That's an assumption on your side. It's a challenge. It's always a challenge. I'm single, so I don't have kids, which makes my life a lot simpler. But I do a lot of spiritual work. I started studying with a spiritual teacher about 6 years ago, and I've been doing a lot of work. And for me, that made a big, big difference because at the end, yeah, we're all a work in progress. He says, we'll keep walking forever. There's nowhere to arrive. It's about the path. And that has made a big difference for me because I see it everywhere in the company, on how I build a team, how I relate to other people. And again, at the end, we're one person. It's not like it's the professional Ingrid and the personal Ingrid. And we need to combine them. And personally, I think the company should have paid for all my therapy sessions. Because whenever I don't know, I with someone, there's usually something in me, there's something to discuss with my therapist. Like it's not so all these like being looking into myself and seeing how I am part of this, how I'm part of the problem and the solution. For me, that's what helps me find balance. But I wouldn't call it balance. It's like, on the contrary, it's like integration. How can I be more me?
How can I be more me? I think that's a brilliant phrase right there. That might end up being the quote we begin this episode with. I think you've given a lot of very interesting answers when you talk about balance, when you talk about your definition of success. You'd be surprised how rarely people bring up being happy when we ask that sort of question. But I think it's very wise to realize the importance of that and putting that as a priority, particularly in ambitious people.
And I think that the rat race world where I'll be happy when something happens, when I get to VP or when I sell my company or like whatever, like that just doesn't work. And you'll never get there. When you get there, you'll have something else. So for me, it's really about the path. And my teacher says that, the Tao, but the journey of 1,000 miles starts beneath your feet. We are in the present. So I really encourage everyone to focus on what you're doing in the present. And again, sometimes we need to make sacrifices, right? I don't know. Like if you want to run a marathon, you need to train. Like it's not that everything is rosy and perfect, but in the overall, we need to aim at enjoying the present. Otherwise, we'll be a very unhappy life.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And we do have one last question we like to end with. I want you to take this very much as sort of however makes the most sense to you. But the question is basically, what words of wisdom do you want to leave us with today? This can be a favorite quote, advice someone else gave you, or a lesson or key takeaway from your journey so far, whatever sort of resonates with you most closely, although you've already given us so much wisdom.
Wow, that's a profound one. Well, I like what you said before about instead of looking for balance, looking for integration, because balance assumes there's two opposite things, right? And maybe we should try to integrate it. And another thing that I've been saying a lot lately, it is what it is. And it's very important to find what we can change and what we cannot change. There's this and the wisdom to know the difference. But I think this is really important, especially in organizations, because some of us live like, well, this doesn't make sense. I want to understand if I can. And some things will not change. And again, because if you want to be happy, sometimes we need to accept that some things are not going to change. And if it doesn't work for you, then leave. It doesn't mean that you need to be miserable or whatever. Like you always have the choice to leave. So I know it may sound conformist, but I don't mean it in that way. It's just like I don't know, most of the people in my life for some reason are just really upset about things that they cannot change these days. Some things are not going to change. And at the same time, let's find the problems that work and find a solution.
Well, I like that you use, because I've heard the term "it is what it is" used in a different context. And I like that you're using it as a sorting mechanism for which are my problems that I'm going to tackle. I think in that context, that's excellent advice. Thank you so much, Ingrid. We really appreciate everything you shared with us and taught us today. And I honestly can't believe that this hour flew by so quickly. Thank you to everyone that joined us live. We appreciate you bring your energy to today's discussion. And Spencer and I and the team behind Founders Voyage feel really fortunate to be part of this community with you and for the opportunity to bring you this experience each week. So we'd love to hear your nominations for future Saturday session guests and topical discussions. And we hope that you all have a great rest of your day and or evening ahead, depending on what time it is there. Thanks so much, Ingrid.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to share.
Thank you so much.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.